Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and today I'm here to do a video ranking the 15 Stephen King books that I have read. Now, this is just intended to be a fun video, but I do have a few disclaimers so that we keep this all above board and just keep it fun and lighthearted. So just to let you know, I'm acknowledging the fact that I've only read 15 Stephen King books at this point in time. And with that, I realized that I have not read all of his big buzzy books. So you're gonna notice some important ones missing here: The Stand, The Gunslinger, Cujo, as well as the fact that I'm not including any short story collections on this list. So I fully acknowledge that I'm not the most well-read in Stephen King. And in case you're not aware, even though I do read a lot of horror, people are often surprised to learn that I am not a mega fan of Stephen King. I am not a hater either per se, but I have a complicated relationship with his books, as we will see here. Some of them have been hits and are favorites, and some of them, quite frankly, are not. I just don't always connect with the way that he tells his stories, and we'll get into that more here soon. But I just want to mention that because anytime you're doing possibly negative Stephen King content on YouTube, it can bring a lot of heated debate. So I'm perfectly okay if you disagree with my opinions, but just keep in mind that this is just for fun, and it's not to dismiss anyone's love of any of the books I'm going to be talking about. I'm really not looking to trash them here. I will be keeping it pretty brief in terms of synopsis, mostly focusing on why I did or did not like a particular book, but I will keep this spoiler free, so I won't be talking about endings in any specific terms. All that being said, let's actually get started. Now, starting at the bottom and working my way up to my favorite, we have Salem's Lot at number 15. And I really hate to have this at the bottom of my list because I'm well aware that for a lot of people, this is actually their all-time favorite King book. But I'll be honest, it just did not work for me. Specifically, I just did not connect with the story or the characters. And even though I read this not that long ago, I really have forgotten the details of the story because they just did not stick in my head. A lot of it has to do with the fact that I'm really not a fan of the vampire subgenre. And so while I appreciate that these, of course, are the grisly, gruesome vampires and not the sparkly kind, it just was never meant to be a book that I was going to fall in love with. And I just found it unfortunately very forgettable. Now at number 14, we have Needful Things, and this is one that I appreciate the villain of Leland. He is quite the character, and I actually kind of like the premise behind it. The idea of a store where people have to do things in order to get their coveted items. But in terms of execution, I just didn't really love it. A lot had to do with the fact that I just did not care about the townspeople and their petty problems. And I realized that their problems are supposed to be petty for a reason, and it's almost a very satirical book, but just was not what I was looking to read, and it was too long for my personal taste. You'll hear that with a few of the books on this list. Now at number 13, speaking of books that I thought were possibly too long, we have It. This is another one that I know is going to be really controversial to have so far down on my list because I know a lot of you consider this to be a favorite, but for me it was not. And I do acknowledge the fact that I read this when I was first getting into the horror genre, and I went in with the wrong expectations. Basically, I picked this up because I wanted to read a horror book about a really scary clown. For those of you that have read it, you're probably rolling your eyes in frustration right now because you know the book is really about so much more, and the clown manifestation is only one aspect of the book. And so I kind of missed the mark. I do feel like I need to reread the book now that I understand what it was trying to do. I actually really like the movies, so I do need to give this another chance, but at the time of recording this, it's pretty far down on my list. I was not overly interested in the characters. I just found it to be too long, as I mentioned, and I really had problems with the ending. I'm not going to get into specifics because, again, spoilers, but it's that scene that makes this book so controversial, and a lot of people really look past it and just don't acknowledge how problematic that is. But for me, that was a book-breaking moment, and it really dropped my rating and just made me really disappointed by it. Now at number 12, we have yet another controversial one, and that is Carrie. This one I had a big problem with because I really did not like how Stephen King portrayed his young female protagonist. This book, of course, centers around a girl coming of age, and her first period, and I just felt like Stephen King did a terrible job writing a young woman, and I just had huge problems with it, and I just could not get past the beginning of the story, quite honestly, and it just did not improve from there. I have heard that Stephen King's wife does read his work, and so it really does make me question why she did not see that as more problematic. I realize that it's his debut novel, so I do need to give it a little bit of slack, but for me, it definitely did not work. It was actually the first Stephen King book I ever read, and was definitely not the right place for me to start. Now at number 11, we have Cell, and I did enjoy aspects to this one. I do like some sci-fi horror, particularly when it involves technology. And I will acknowledge that apocalyptic horror is not my go-to subgenre. Despite that, I did find the beginning kind of interesting. I like the idea of some possible zombie-like action happening on the page. But I really struggled with Stephen King's explanations behind the apocalypse. His science was just bad in my opinion, and while it is fiction, I would rather he did not attempt to make an explanation if it was not at least grounded in what was feasible or just made any sense whatsoever. And the biggest reason it's so low on the list is because I thought the ending was really, really bad. I read the ending and I had to reread the ending because I thought I had misread it, because I thought there's no way the book ended like that. And no, that's how he ended it. It was really bad. Now we're at number 10, which is the turning point where I do start to appreciate more of Stephen King's work. And so here we have Thinner. This is one that I actually connected with quite a bit because of my own personal history with eating disorders. So I actually really like the fact that this book involves a man losing weight and getting to the point that he cannot stop losing weight. And for me, that is really scary because I personally saw myself in the character. And so in terms of a premise, this one worked really well. I do acknowledge that this book is a little bit problematic in terms of its use of gypsy people, which of course is a term you would not use anymore. And definitely it's not a perfect book, but I actually thought the ending was pretty solid, and overall thought it was, quite entertaining and scary all at the same time. Then at number 9, we have The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon, and this is one that I really liked. I felt that it was just a really nice, quiet story. I did like the main character, even though she was younger. And for me, the best aspects were definitely those survival aspects of her wandering around in the woods, trying to figure out what to do in terms of food and water and so forth. I did not honestly care much for the baseball aspects, and so that is the reason the book is as low on the list as it is for me. But it actually had some elements that I really did enjoy, and it just was so different than anything else I've read by Stephen King. So I can definitely see why it's a hidden gem. I do know quite a few people that really love this book, and I can definitely see why, even though it isn't an all-time favorite for me. At number 8, we have The Dead Zone, and this is one that I did really enjoy the premise of. I love the idea of a man who has some kind of paranormal or supernatural intuition, the ability to see things that he should have no ability to see, or know things that should be impossible. I enjoyed the story for the most part until it really got bogged down in the politics, and regardless of your political views, I just felt like there was too much emphasis on the candidates that were running for office, and I just did not care enough, and so that did take away from the story. But I actually really like the ending. I can be hard on Stephen King endings, but this is one that actually really worked well for me. I was completely pulled back in by the last few chapters, and it just had a big emotional impact on me. So while not perfect, again, one that I definitely appreciate. Then at number 7, we have Christine, and this is one I went into with very low expectations because I did not think I wanted to read about a haunted car or possessed car, but I ended up really enjoying this one for the most part. I thought it was just a really fun premise. You get to see a man or a young teenage boy who becomes obsessed with his car, and the story is told from his friend's perspective, which I thought was a really good choice because you get to see his obsession from the outside. And overall, I thought this one was pretty well plotted. It's maybe not the most substantial story and maybe not the scariest, but it was a lot of fun. People told me to pick it up and treat it like a B movie, and if you go in just expecting an entertainment ride, I really thought that it delivered, and actually, thought it was pretty fun. A little too long, but overall an enjoyable read for sure. Then at number 6, we have The Shining. This is one that actually surprised me. I went into it thinking it was a haunted motel story, and so when it turned out to be much more about the father and son and just the psychological aspects of being in the motel, this one ended up working a lot better than I thought. I love the son's perspective and his paranormal abilities. I really connected with that story, and at the time of recording this, no, I have not read Dr. Sleep, so you will not see it on this list. I've heard mixed things about it, so I'm not sure whether or not I should proceed with it, but The Shining held up. I had not seen the movie when I read the book, and so I really didn't know what I was getting into, but I enjoyed it. Wasn't a perfect read, but definitely an atmospheric one. Great to read during the winter months. And yeah, it was pretty solid. So we're now on to the top 5, and these are all ones that I really did enjoy and would probably reread at some point. At number 5, we have The Long Walk. And this is one, again, I went into with kind of tempered expectations because based off the premise, I had no idea why so many people love this book about a whole bunch of boys walking to their death. But once I got into it, I kind of understood why, and that's because the character work is really good and it's just a compelling story. It's so unique. The premise is so out there that I thought that this book would never hold my attention, but I completely suspended my disbelief and was just fascinated. Honestly, it probably would have been higher up on this list if we had been given more explanation behind the walk, and I really was missing that. But regardless of that, everything else I thought was really well done, and again, really compelling for a story that otherwise has a really simple plot, but actually worked pretty well. Then at number 4, we have The Running Man. I think a lot of people will have The Long Walk above this one, but of the Bachman books, this one was my favorite and I just really enjoyed it. I loved the dystopian setting. I thought it was fascinating that Stephen King was able to predict reality TV shows before they were a thing. And of course, this book definitely reminded me of The Hunger Games, so I'm sure that the YA author got some inspiration from this book. And I just thought it was really well paced. I was very invested in the story. I cared very deeply that the main character would survive. I wanted to know if he would get out and what would happen to him. I thought they did a great job giving him a bit of a backstory so you understand why he decided to be on the running man in order to help his family. And yeah, this one was just exciting. It's honestly one I will reread because I just really enjoyed it, and I flew through the audiobook, which I don't always get to say about Stephen King's books, but I just needed to know what was going to happen next, which was fantastic. Then at number 3, we have The Institute, which might be a bit controversial because I understand that die-hard Stephen King fans don't consider this one of his best, but personally I found it to be very entertaining. It was straightforward in plot and really didn't have any of the weird Stephen King stuff that sometimes turns me off a little bit when he goes to some strange and awkward places. But in this one, I just really liked the characters. I loved these smart and witty teenagers. I liked their paranormal powers, and just trying to see how they would get out of the situation they were being put into. I thought it was well paced and engaging, and just overall a really good book. Regardless of who the author is, it's definitely one I would recommend, and again, one I would definitely consider rereading. Now at number 2, we have Misery, and this is one I really do enjoy. I love the setup for it, the nurse who is obsessed with this author and is forcing him to write her stories. And oh my goodness, this one is disturbing and grisly and terrifying. I'm a huge fan of stories that involve kidnapping and hostage situations or anything like that. So to have this woman hold him captive completely grabbed my attention. And I thought that this book was well paced, it was not too long, and just really interesting. I'm not the hugest fan of stories within stories, which did hold me back from fully loving it, but overall it was just really intriguing and definitely, again, one that I just flew through and would absolutely consider rereading in the future. Now we have made it to the number 1 spot, and for those of you that know my channel, you might already guess that yes, my favorite Stephen King book is Pet Sematary. This one spoke to me on so many levels. As a parent, I really connected with the grief and fears of a parent in this situation, and I just thought this one was very well plotted. It is legitimately scary, and I just love this book. I did get a chance to do the audio, which is narrated by Dexter, and definitely added to the experience. But even without that, I do think this book just fully holds up as one of the best Stephen King books. In my opinion, if I was going to recommend where someone should start with his work, I would say here, because I have no complaints with it. I loved every aspect. I thought it was perfectly well paced, well plotted, and yes, I just love it so much. It's definitely one that I will continue to go back to because I pick up more and more each time I revisit it, and I would love to see everyone else pick this one up. I think it's quite popular, but if you have not read it, please get on it. It is so worth it. Even if you, like myself, are not a diehard Stephen King fan, this one is absolutely worth the hype. It is fantastic. So that is it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I would love to hear your comments down below. What did you think of my rankings list? And as long as you keep it reasonably polite, feel free to disagree. I would love to hear what your favorite and least favorite Stephen King books are. And I would love to hear recommendations about which King books I should read next, because I know I have not read all of them. And I would love to redo this list in the future, maybe doing a top 10 once I've read maybe 25 of his books, for example. Otherwise, if you're still here and don't hate me, consider giving this video a thumbs up, because I'm sure I'm going to get some thumbs down for my oh so unpopular opinions. If you're new to my channel, please consider subscribing. I do read a lot of horror as well as thrillers, fantasy, and science fiction. Otherwise, I will talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.